All right, welcome back, everybody. You may have been joining us early on our previous broadcast. We were having some significant technological difficulties, and the irony of that is we're talking about technology on this broadcast. I'm going to start again and act like that never happened. So if you're listening to us, give us a shout out in the comments. Tell us where you're listening from, what your connection is to Bald Head Island. We'd love to hear from you. My name is Travis Gilbert. I'm the Educator and Collections Coordinator here at the Old Baldy Foundation. And as I was saying previously, it's really beginning to hit home here in the Old Baldy Foundation, the effects of this pandemic, this COVID-19. And we truly hope that you and your family are safe, that you're healthy, and that the economic effects have been marginal for you and your loved ones. On behalf of the entire Old Baldy Foundation, we extend our gratitude that we all are collectively working towards getting on the other side of this epidemic. And we thank you for your patience, for your teamwork, and for your sanity, because these are really difficult times for everybody. So hang in there, and the Old Baldy Foundation, we're with you all out there. So today's topic, we're going to be talking about Fresnel lenses, which is this technology that really revolutionized lighthouse technology even until today. And the great driver for discussing Fresnel lenses and their role in the story of Bald Head Island is this third and final lighthouse that was constructed on Bald Head Island in the year 1903. The lighthouse is known as Cape Fear Light Station. It was constructed in 1903, and that's almost 100 years after Old Baldy was constructed. And I say it's the third lighthouse because we have that previous lighthouse that is no longer. It predates Old Baldy. Of course, we have Old Baldy Lighthouse, constructed in 1817. You can still climb Old Baldy, and it is known as the oldest standing lighthouse in the state of North Carolina. And then we have this light station here, 1903 Cape Fear Light Station, built about 3 miles east of Old Baldy, out on the pitch of Cape Fear. Lighthouse technology had been revolutionized from the construction of Old Baldy in 1817 and the construction of Cape Fear Light Station in 1903. And it was largely thanks to a French physicist by the name of Augustin-Jean Fresnel. Mr. Fresnel discovered the ability to use glass prisms, such as this, to refract or bend light. You can imagine a wick that the lighthouse keeper would light, and that wick or that flame is emitting light 360 degrees around the flame. And think about that, is a lot of wasted light. The light that's going upwards, the light that's going downwards, the light that's going landwards, and every angle in between is not particularly doing the mariner any good out there at sea. So the conflict or the problem with lighthouse technology was, how do you refract or bend that wasted light into a beam that could be consolidated parallel with the horizon out towards the sea, where it could reach the mariner and do some good. Well, before Mr. Fresnel discovered this ability to refract or bend light using glass prisms, the lighthouse service in America used a variety of systems, largely thanks to an individual named Winslow Lewis. And Winslow Lewis developed these parabolic reflectors. It's basically a parabola, or a sphere, if you think of it, coated with metal, and that reflector is placed behind the wick. So the idea was it could reflect some of the light that was going to be wasted and cast it back out onto the horizon where it could do some good. It still wasn't the most efficient or best of those technologies. So around 1819, Auguste and Jean Fresnel started to develop in France this technology that would become known as Fresnel lenses. The Fresnel lenses, and I brought out a model, looked pretty similar to this. There's a variety of sizes or a variety of shapes, so not every Fresnel lens is going to look like this one. Brought this one out for a reason, stay with me there. But the idea was it is lenses that arrange these glass prisms in such a way that it refracts or bends all that wasted light into a parallel beam back out onto the horizon. Now the Fresnel lenses come in 6 orders or sizes, the first being the largest and the most powerful, and the 6th being the weakest and the smallest. So to compare, when old Baldy was outfitted with this new technology just a few years before the American Civil War, the Lighthouse Service gave old Baldy a 3rd order Fresnel lens. It's right there in the middle of the spectrum. Now after the Civil War, when old Baldy is reestablished, they gave her a 4th order lens. Again, right there in the middle of the spectrum. Now Cape Fear Light Station was so important and Cape Fear was so dreaded by mariners, in the year 1903, the Lighthouse Service planned on giving Cape Fear Light Station a 1st order Fresnel lens. It was the largest of the 6 orders or sizes, and the specific lens that ends up at Cape Fear Light Station, in fact, was so large it weighed 6,000 pounds. Now this lens that eventually makes its way to Cape Fear Light Station has a long history before it even reaches Bald Head Island. It was purchased by the Lighthouse Service on November 26, 1872 for about $10,101.05, by the way. It was equipped to flash every 10 seconds, and in total, it had 1,008 of these prisms arranged. There were 3 layers, I would call them, of these prisms. You first had upper catadioptric lenses, that first of the 3 layers. In the center, you had flash panels, and on the bottom, you had lower catadioptric panels. So the idea was each of these layers had a different role on casting that light horizontally or parallel with the horizon. In this upper panels, we have 8 prisms per 24 panels. In the center flash, you had 16 of these prisms in 24 panels. And on the bottom, you had another 8 prisms per 24 panels. So what I mean, each of these is a panel. And they would each have 8 of these smaller prisms, as you see here. And I'm going to bring you around towards the end and show you one of those panels that we have on exhibit here in the Keeper's Cottage. So collectively, these 1,008 prisms arranged in these 3 tiers or these 3 different types of panels are all going to do their job of casting that light out onto the horizon, as we call refracting or bending that wasted light. Well, even though we purchased that lens, the Lighthouse Service purchased that lens in 1872, it basically, it didn't have a home for a long time, several decades. It was put on show. It was a show horse, if you will. You see, during the Industrial Revolution, America and several other countries had what we call expositions. There were giant fairs, and the idea of these fairs is you would go to a booth and a specific company or a government service would create a booth, and they would display their technology, their role in the Industrial Revolution. And the lens that was purchased in 1872 went to a variety of different world-renowned expositions where it would be seen by over 20 million attendees. 20 million people saw this lens before it ever made it to Bald Head Island. So Kevin Duffus, who wrote our book for the 200th anniversary of Old Baldy, calls this lens arguably the most famous lens, Fresnel lens, in the Lighthouse Service. It went to the Centennial Exposition of 1876, which commemorated the 100th birthday of the United States of America, of course held in Philadelphia. It went to the Trans-Mississippi and International Exposition of 1898, which was in Omaha, Nebraska. And it even went to the Pan American Exposition of 1901, which was held in Buffalo, New York. At least 3 expositions this lens went to and was featured in the Lighthouse Service's booth. There may have been more. There are many historians, Kevin Duffus being one of them, who aren't sure if there were additional expositions where this lens was displayed at. But when they built this lighthouse in 1903, they finally come across this lens, and it fits perfectly within the parameters, within the needs of Cape Fear Light Station. So finally, this lens arrives on Bald Head Island in June of 1903, packed in 42 cases. 42 cases. And it arrives out on a pier on the riverside of Bald Head Island at the Cape Fear River. In fact, in order to ship all the materials they needed to build Cape Fear Light Station and all 42 cases of this Fresnel lens, the Lighthouse Service built a tram, built basically a railway that went from the pier in the Cape Fear River across 3 miles of Bald Head Island to the Cape. And many, if you're familiar with Bald Head Island, you may know that is known as Federal Road today. That's why Federal Road is arguably the only straight road on Bald Head Island. That's because it is the former roadbed of this railway that was laid across the island to ship all these materials from the riverside to the Cape side of the island, pulled by mules on this railway. Now, once they finally get all these pieces, all 1,008 prisms in each 3 layers, 150 feet up into the air, that's how tall this lighthouse was. You think Old Baldy's 110 feet tall. Cape Fear Light Station was 150 feet tall. They eventually get it to the top of the lighthouse, and it's there that this famous Captain Charlie, who we're going to be elaborating on in the coming days and weeks, lights a wick inside of that Fresnel lens on August 31st, 1903 at sundown, illuminating this lens for the first time until about 1958. Hey folks, we have quite a few listeners, and I'm sorry we had some really nice comments on the last broadcast that I had to cancel. So if you're out there listening, give us a holler, shout out. What's your connection to Bald Head Island? Where are you listening from? Do you have any questions out there about Fresnel lenses? I'll attempt to find the answer for you. Let's see and hear where we are. We have Mackie Miller listening. Mackie, thank you. You've been just as dedicated to Old Baldy while we're all in self-isolation as you are when you're here on the island. So we very much appreciate all your support. Time until about 19. Please pass that along to me. Well, thanks, Mackie. I wish I could. I'm going to pass along my immune system to you. I'm not sure which is better on us. So, again, this lens weighed 6,000 pounds. And you can imagine that in order to make that lens flash once every 10 seconds, you had to turn the lens. The idea was that every time the lens was turned and reached one of these flash prisms, which sometimes are called bullseye prisms, that's what makes it flash. So if you are standing in front of one of these prisms, once that light reached that bullseye prism, it would flash, and then once it turned away from that, it would become dull, it wouldn't flash. So how do you make a 6,000-pound lens turn or revolve? Well, if you look on the bottom there were bronze wheels that made this lens move. These were 10 bronze, we call them chariot wheels. They were original to the 1872 pedestal for that 6,000-pound lens. And it revolved by a clockwork system. So just as a clock, in the olden days, you'd have to wind it up. The lighthouse keepers would have to wind up this mechanism. And what would propel the wheels was a weight would descend down the shaft of the lighthouse, all 150 feet. And once it reached the bottom, the lighthouse keepers would have to wind the clockwork system back up to the top. So gravity, again, would pull that weight all 150 feet down the shaft of the lighthouse, revolving that lens on the bronze chariot wheels. Now, can you imagine 6,000 pounds being turned or revolved on 10 bronze chariot wheels? It would not take long for something to happen to those wheels, whether to be ground to oblivion or whether it wouldn't work. And if you listen to Captain Charlie, this thing never quite worked pretty well. It was not a well-oiled machine by any means. And almost immediately, they have to replace those wheels because they were just not working so well under the weight of that enormous lens. So finally, in 1920, they replaced that original 1872 pedestal with the bronze chariot wheels and began floating this enormous lens in a mercury bath. It was before the federal government understood that mercury is highly poisonous, but it did the job well. Captain Charlie said you could float this lens so well in a mercury bath, even though it weighed this astronomical weight, he could move the lens just by touching it. Mercury displaced weight that well. So it just bypassed this idea of having to put metal on metal and ground those wheels to oblivion. Now we can use mercury and just float that lens pretty well. So it took 47 days. They actually had to take the entire lens off of the pedestal and put it onto the ground to reassemble this lens. And it took 47 days without a light on top to get the 1872 pedestal replaced with this mercury float pedestal, and they put it back up on top of the lighthouse and relit it. Mackie had a question. I'm confused about something. If the Fresnel lens arrived in 48 boxes, how was it all assembled? Who assembled it? I can't even put a chair together. It arrives in 2 pieces. Yeah, there was a Lampus. He was based, so the lighthouse service was broken up into various districts, and Cape Fear Light Station and Old Baldy was in the 6th Lighthouse District. It was headquartered in Charleston. So there was a man that was headquartered in Charleston whose primary role for this entire district was to work on the lamps. So they would bring that gentleman up from Charleston, and he would be responsible for putting together this lens for Cape Fear Light Station. And yes, I agree with you, Mackie. I would not want that job at all. I would not be any good. Barbara Grant, watching from outside Washington, D.C., love technology from all ages. Thanks for sharing. Barbara, if I remember right, yeah, your career is in some sort of engineering or technology, and I'm very much an artsy person, so to try and describe engineering and technology and have it make sense out there for our listeners, it's a little bit of a challenge for me, so I probably could use your help, Barbara. I hope everybody's well and healthy in your family up there outside of DC. Now, the ending of this story, and by the way, I wanted to point out, this is a model of St. Augustine Lighthouse's first order Fresnel lens. It is very, very similar to the lens that was at Cape Fear Light Station. So this model is not an exact model of what would have been out there at Cape Fear Light Station, but it's about as close as we can get, and it's close enough that we can use it as a teaching tool for you and here at the lighthouse. So in 1958, in May of that year, Captain Charlie is the man that flips the switch to turn on Oak Island Lighthouse for the very first time. Oak Island being that lighthouse that's still in operation here in the lower Cape Fear. If you're familiar with Bald Head Island, you see Oak Island Lighthouse when you're on the ferry coming across. So they decommissioned that same day Cape Fear Light Station, and they decide to destroy that light station. There's no one's exactly certain on what made the federal government decide to destroy that lighthouse out at the Cape. There is one of the most well-known explanations that I've always been told is the Lighthouse Service wanted to minimize the amount of towers a mariner could see at one given time, so there wouldn't be any room for confusing the mariners. It's just like, if we have 5 lighthouses and only one works, what's the point in keeping the other 4 on the horizon when a mariner may confuse those? So it was decided to destroy the lighthouse. And that was given to a company called J.V. Tomberlin Construction Company. They were based out of Wilmington. And the day to detonate this lighthouse with dynamite was 11 a.m. on September 15th, 1958. In one of the most ironic twists of fate in the story of Bald Head Island, this construction company was given the Fresnel lens. Fresnel lenses are irreplaceable. They are valuable pieces of art and technology nowadays. So the idea that the Coast Guard gave this demolition crew the rights, permission, ownership now of one of the most famous Fresnel lenses in the history of the United States Lighthouse Service is very ironic, and as you're going to find out, extremely unfortunate. The construction company disassembled the Fresnel lens. Mackie, talk about putting it together. Imagine disassembling it and trying to get it down all 150 feet. And they demo the lighthouse, and that is why it's no longer. All we have is its foundation out at the Bald Head Island Conservancy. Well, when they take it back to Wilmington, they actually assemble it in their house, and it almost becomes kind of like another exposition. We talked about this Fresnel lens long history of going on exposition before it actually found a home and a purpose at a lighthouse. And again, this Fresnel lens is so massive, they can only fit the lower lenses or panels, and the flash panels, and then they say they run out of room. They can't even get the top panels to fit, and it becomes kind of famous. People from all over Wilmington and all over southeastern North Carolina come to their home to see this renowned Fresnel lens. It goes on one last exposition, if you will. And eventually they sell it for $100 to Labriola's Antiques, which was along Oleander Drive in Wilmington. If you were from the area, you know Oleander Drive very well. It's a main thoroughfare through town. And Labriola's Antiques creates a brick kind of platform, and they reassemble what they can of this Fresnel lens right there along Oleander Drive, and they begin selling off prisms. First, they begin selling them pretty cheap, $10. As more and more folks tell them how priceless this Fresnel lens is, they increase $20, $40, $50, and one by one, these prisms find a new home. And it wasn't until 2009 that the Old Baldy Foundation was able to purchase what was left of that first order Fresnel lens from Labriola's Antiques. And we were able to bring it here to Bald Head Island, where it rests safely in cases, I think, that are not too dissimilar to the cases, the 42 cases, that it was originally shipped to Bald Head Island in 1903. Since purchasing that lens in 2009, the Old Baldy Foundation, through the leadership of Chris Webb and Kim Gutshaw, they have been doing this campaign called Bringing Home the Light. There are literally wanted posters describing what this Fresnel lens looked like, what the prisms look like, and if you know of anybody that has a prism, or if you have a prism yourself, why don't you consider donating it back to the Old Baldy Foundation? The idea being that eventually the Old Baldy Foundation can collect as many pieces of this Fresnel lens as we can, and eventually reassemble the Fresnel lens and put it on exhibit so folks can visit Bald Head Island and see the massive and impressive first order Fresnel lens, one of the most famous Fresnel lenses in the history of the United States Lighthouse Service, that was stationed and performed here from 1903 to 1958 at Cape Fear Light Station. That would be awesome. I agree, Kara. It would be just amazing one day to see as much as we can reassembled. And Helen, I'm an art teacher and I could never explain as well as you. Doing a great job. This is all fascinating. Thank you. Well, thank you, Helen. Learning about Fresnel lenses and how to explain them has been a challenge. So it gets a little better each time, at least I hope. So, if you have any more comments, listen out there. We'd love to hear from you. So, if you would like to learn a little bit more about Fresnel lenses, we have some great resources in our gift shop. First of all, The Story of Cape Fear and Bald Head Island by Kevin Duffus is the book that we published for our 200th anniversary. And you can purchase that by emailing Jess, Jess, at oldbaldy.org. There are wonderful pictures of that Fresnel lens on exhibit at those different expositions, and it discusses in much detail the history of that lens. Another famous North Carolina Fresnel lens is the lens that was at Cape Hatteras Lighthouse that the Confederates disassembled and took away from Cape Hatteras, and then it disappeared. And it wasn't until later that it was rediscovered. And Kevin Duffus talks about the history of that lost light in this book, The Lost Light, another book by Kevin Duffus that we sell in our gift shop. Again, if you email Jess at oldbaldy.org, she can get you some reading materials while we're all self-quarantined. And lastly, A Short Bright Flash, It's a book by Teresa Levitt, and it discusses a history of Augustin Jean Fresnel and the birth of the modern lighthouse using Fresnel lenses. Again, all 3 books, we are happy to ship them to you. Same-day shipping if you tell us or email just before 3 p.m. every day but Sunday. Some great reading materials that are going to elaborate on the history of Fresnel lenses that we just briefly discuss or just briefly hit the surface here today. Kara, about the story of Cape Fear a few years ago, but I've never read it. Started last night, inspired by these videos. Kara, well, we love to hear that, and you're just going to love that book. Really does justice to the story of this beautiful island that we all, at least myself right now, get to call home. So that is one last comment I want to make about Cape Fear Light Station's Fresnel lens. I'm going to move this video. I do want to take you over to a case here and show you we do have a piece of the Fresnel lens on exhibit. And this is one of the lenses. You can see that many of the prisms are missing, but it gives you an idea that is one of the 3 layers. The upper, the flash panels, and the lower catadioptric lenses or panels. One of the lens pieces that we were able to purchase from that antique dealer and is now back home here on Bald Head Island. So on that note, hey, thank you for listening. Thanks for checking in on this edition of Quarantine Collections. We're going to be back this afternoon at 2 o'clock for a history of the Bald Head Island Marina. The marina, you might wonder, well, what kind of history can you tell us about the Bald Head Island Marina? Well, did you know that 9,000 acres of saltwater marsh here on Bald Head Island is preserved and protected because of the Bald Head Island Marina? I'm going to leave you on that cliffhanger because it is a fascinating story that entails almost a decade of Bald Head Island's history. So join us this afternoon to learn about the Bald Head Island Marina and how it's connected to the Saltwater Marsh Preserve. And you can visit all of our previous videos on Instagram TV. You can visit our YouTube channel, or they are also posted here on Facebook. You can see future videos on the same methods. If you're listening to this broadcast in the future, give us a comment, give us a shout out, ask us a question, and we will get back to you. And until then, hey everybody, be safe. We're all in this together. On behalf of the Old Baldy Foundation, thank you for listening and spending time with us this morning, and we will see you in a future broadcast. Thanks everybody.